Hello and welcome to BBC World News with me, Komla.
And I'm Sally Bundock. Here are the headlines. Also to come in World Business Report, the cost of food is going up in China. We'll assess what that means for the world's second largest economy.
But first, after a day of violence in Egypt where more than 50 people were killed, the interim president says fresh elections should be held early next year. Now, supporters of the ousted president, Mohamed Morsi, have spent another night on the streets of Cairo. On Monday, at least 51 people were killed in the capital, most of them Morsi supporters. Both sides have very different versions of events. Catherine Amon has the latest. I want to put some live pictures now on your screen. Quentin Somerville there. The man who was in command of the Costa Concordia cruise ship on the night she sank is due to go on trial in Italy. Captain Francesco Schettino faces multiple manslaughter charges. 32 people died when the ship struck rocks and capsized just off the Italian island of Giglio early last year. Our correspondent Alan Johnston was among the first reporters to reach the scene of the disaster, and on the eve of the trial, he returned to the island. Well, it's that time in the program where we take a look ahead at World Business Reports. Greece gets its money, but what's next? What's next is Sally. Hello, Sally.
Hello, Komla. Good morning. Well, I have to say, and I'm sure nobody's surprised to hear me say this, it is proving to be a summer of discontent for Greece. Eurozone finance ministers did agree to lend more money to its beleaguered government, but warn the country's economic outlook remains uncertain. Its international lenders also said Greece's reform programme is moving too slowly, so the next tranche of much-needed bailout funds comes with strings attached. In the meantime, prices are gathering pace in China. Consumer price inflation rose to 2.7%. For those who are in charge, the authorities at the central bank and government, to try and figure out how to steer the Chinese economy when you've got food prices going up and other prices going down. How do you manage that? We'll be looking at that and the other business stories. If you can, join me in about 20 minutes. You can't afford to miss it, really.
We can. We'll see you later on, Sally. Thanks very much. Let's take a look at some of the other stories we're covering here on BBC News. Riots police in Turkey have fired tear gas, water cannon and rubber bullets to block demonstrators from entering Istanbul's Gezi Park. The area was the center of unrest last month during anti-government protests. Police closed the park on Monday after protest leaders called for another rally there. Fertility doctors in Belgium say they've devised a simplified form of IVF which costs less than $300. The technique could make treatments affordable for childless couples across the world. They say the results indicate a pregnancy rate of around 30%, about the same as conventional IVF. A heavy rainstorm in Canada's largest city, Toronto, has caused power outages and transport chaos on Monday. The rain flooded subway stations and about 1,000 passengers were stranded for hours in a commuter train filled with gushing water. Hundreds of thousands of people were left without electricity. Okay, let's take our minds back to that dramatic day 2 years ago in Pakistan, where U.S. Special Forces tracked down and killed the al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. At the time, there were questions about how he lived there so long without being caught. Well, now a leaked report from the Pakistani government has blamed the country's intelligence services for failing to detect him. It's also highly critical of the United States. Here's Richard Galpin in Islamabad. And stay with us on BBC News. Still to come. You're watching BBC News. Now we're going to bring you some the news from the UK now. Just a moment as we. There we go. Well, let's before we bring you the UK news, some of the stories that we're covering. Well, I think here we go. The Labour leader, Ed Miliband, is a proposer. You're watching BBC World News. I'm Komla Dumor. Here are the latest headlines. Details have been released of the injuries suffered by passengers on the Asiana plane that crashed in San Francisco on Saturday. Spinal injuries and torn ligaments were among the most common. Investigators say the plane was flying significantly below its target speed on approach, and that the pilots tried to abort the landing seconds before it crashed. 2 passengers were killed and dozens injured. Johnny Diamond has more. Canadian police say they've now recovered 13 bodies from the town of Lac-Mégantic in Quebec, where a runaway fuel train exploded in the early hours of Saturday. 500 million people in China could have had their lives shortened by 5 years. And that's because of air pollution from decades of burning coal. That's the conclusion of a study published on Tuesday. For years, the Chinese government supplied free coal to those who lived in the north of the country so they could stay warm in winter. Martin Patience is in Beijing and joins us now. Martin, what are the details? Greater detail a bit later on. Thanks very much, BBC's Martin Patience in Beijing. Let's get some of the sports news now. Robbie Deans has fallen on his sword, stepping down as Australian Rugby Union coach following the Wallabies' heavy loss to the British and Irish Lions on Saturday. The Wimbledon champion Andy Murray hasn't stopped moving since Sunday. There were talk shows and photo shoots and even a visit to the Prime Minister's house. And number 10, Barcelona have reached an agreement in principle to sell their striker David Villa to Atletico Madrid. And that's the sport. A new exhibition is open here in London to mark the 60th anniversary of the ceasefire that brought an end to the Korean War. Michelle Hussein went along to find out how artists from the peninsula are looking at the conflict in new ways. The Korean War veteran David Kamsler ending that report by Michelle Hussein. Now, choirs are well known, of course, for synchronizing their voices, but apparently that's not all that comes together when they sing. A study in Sweden says that as people... Fear not, I'm not about to break into song and ruin your day. But we can keep in touch on Twitter. I'm at BBC Komla Dumor. We'll return shortly with the latest news, and World Business Report is coming up as well, of course, after the weather. You're watching BBC World News. Hello, you're watching BBC World News. I'm Komla Dumor. Here are the latest headlines. And those are the latest headlines from BBC World News. It's now time for the latest financial news with Sally and World Business Report.
Hello and welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, as trade talks continue in Washington, we focus on the benefits to patients on both sides of the Atlantic, hoping for life-saving treatments. But first, it's proving to be a summer of discontent for Greece. Eurozone finance ministers agreed to lend more money to its beleaguered government, but warn the country's economic outlook remains uncertain. Its international lenders also said Greece's reform programme is moving too slowly. So the next tranche of much-needed bailout funds comes with strings attached. Greece needs to show it's making further progress with its reforms, especially when it comes to the privatisation of state assets. Plus, the government... Now, Christian, this money is not coming in one fell swoop. It's being drip-fed to the government in Athens. Is that a sign of mistrust, or that's because then when they need it? How is the Greek government faring right now? Because very recently it had a deep crisis following the decision to close down the state broadcaster. That led to a political furore, and the coalition government has changed. What about privatisation programme? Because this seems to have been bereft with problems. OK, let's hope you're right, Christian. Thank you very much for your thoughts on the situation in Greece. But let's now move on, because as we've been telling you, trade negotiators are locked away in a room in Washington, poring over the details of a huge transatlantic trade deal between the US and EU. To give you a sense of the scale of these talks, we're focusing on just one area that needs to be grappled with, and that's medicine. Currently, a drug approved for use in America could take 2 years or more before it's approved here in Europe, and vice versa. Now, that is bad news for patients waiting for life-saving cures. So one of the aims of these talks is to make it easier for medicines licensed on one side of the Atlantic to get the go-ahead on the other. Here's Jeremy Howe. Now, prices are on their way up in China. In particular, the price of food. If you look at consumer price inflation, it rose to 2.7% in June. That's up from 2.1% in May. Let's go to Rico Hizon, who's at our Asia Business Hub in Singapore, who'll make sense of all of this. Lovely to see you, Rico. Should we be concerned about this movement in prices?
Sally.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Rico, making sense of those latest numbers out of China. Other business stories: an architectural landmark in London is to change hands. China's Ping An Insurance Group has agreed to buy the Lloyd's building in London for $388 million. The building, which is home to the world's leading insurance market, was owned by the German asset management fund Commerz Real. Chinese firms have been looking to buy assets in key markets in their quest to expand their presence globally. In the US, the earnings season has kicked off with results from Alcoa, the US's largest aluminium producer, in fact the world's biggest aluminium producer, reported second quarter earnings of $76 million, excluding the impact of restructuring costs and costs tied to a racketeering and fraud probe, but revenues disappointed somewhat. So let's have a look at the markets in Asia. They have rebounded today, as you can see in Japan, up over 2%. Which is quite a big jump. The yen has weakened again today. If we have a quick look at how it's going, the dollar just buying over 101 yen again. So that's helped the exporters. We'll look through the papers in just a moment. Stay with us.
Agricultural shows were once the highlights of the farming diary, but in the last few years, many have been forced to close down. But one show that's still going strong is the Great Yorkshire Show, which begins today. Jenny Hill has more. Looks like fun. Coming up at 6, Bill and Susanna will have all the day's business and sport on breakfast and more on the Labour Party's plans to change their relationship with the trade unions. Hello, I'm Komla Dumor. You're watching BBC News. Here are our top stories this hour. Okay, it's time for our newspaper review. We'll take a look at the stories making headlines around the world. Joining us is Lawrence Gosling, Editor-in-Chief of Investment Week. Great to see you, Lawrence. Welcome.
Good morning, Lawrence.
Good morning.
Let's go straight to Egypt, the Gulf news, and of course on the front pages of many papers across the world. Close to 51 people killed. The details, it's still being debated what exactly happened, but with all this terrible bloodshed, the future certainly looks quite bleak for the country. But Lawrence, if we fast forward to current events, if the Pakistani intelligence and security services are being described as negligent, incompetent, and grave complicity when it comes to Osama bin Laden, these are issues that still will cause a lot of concern here in Britain, in the United States, because these are countries that we're supposed to be partnering with to deal with the threat of terrorism.
Now, Lawrence, explain to us this story on the front page of today's Financial Times. What do you think the outcome will be? Do you think that they'll just have to stop this?
Yeah, I think there will be a huge fine.
But even when you travel to some of China's modern cities now, the extent of the smog, we were talking to Martin Patience a moment ago, and I was just looking behind him. You could barely see anything. Is the Chinese government taking this as seriously as they should? And what really can they do about it? But will there be a political price to pay if these recommendations are not fully implemented, because there still is quite a bit of anger on the streets directed towards bankers in the cities?
It could be or Fred Goodwin.
I mean, we know the names and we know what was going on, but it would be interesting to see what real changes take place in the City of London as a consequence. Now, what about this story? Daily Telegraph. Be polite to the public, the police are told. I think as well, police told, to be polite. And actually, within the police in this country, they're facing huge cutbacks, resources being cut back, jobs on the line, days getting longer. I mean, it's tough, isn't it?
Absolutely.
All right, I think we're going to leave it there. Lawrence Gosling of Investment Week, thank you very much for being with us.
As ever, a lot more to the stories than just what the headlines suggest. That is all from us here for the time being on the BBC, but stay with us, because on BBC One, if you're watching in the UK, you can join the breakfast team in a few minutes. If you're watching overseas,
you're stuck with us.
We'll return. We'll see you soon.